I've been very out of touch with the video game world for a number of years now, but a while back I made the decision that I would at least try to stay somewhat in touch by checking out some games that seem to be considered among the greatest of all time. So a couple of months ago I finished Half-Life 2, and I've got to say, even as someone who is not the biggest fan of first-person shooters in general, I can't deny that it is really good. The variety of enemies, weapons, levels and gameplay was really impressive and kept me hooked for what had to be around 25 to 30 hours. Yeah, it's a really long game. Before I played it, I was very skeptical about the idea that a first-person shooter could be one of the greatest games ever. I always figured that once you've played one first-person shooter, you've played them all. They're all just shoot, find cover, reload, keep shooting till all the enemies are dead, and then move on to another area that's just more of the same. Half-Life 2 had some parts like that, but it had a ton of other things as well, so you never get tired of just doing the same thing. But the game does have issues, and seeing as how this game gets enough praise already, I thought it might be interesting to go over some of the more negative aspects of the game. The first-person perspective. The first and probably biggest problem is, I hate the first-person perspective. I hate how long it takes to turn your head. I hate not being able to see where I'm standing, and I hate not being able to see what's to the side or behind me. This game in particular seems a little buggy when it comes to climbing ladders and picking up objects. I kept dying because I couldn't tell my character was still on a ladder, and there were a lot of times when he picked up objects and he dropped them when he walked through a door or past a wall. There are also 3 stages in the game which are basically a recreation of the children's game The Floor is Lava, where you really need to see where you are standing, so I found these stages a little frustrating, even though they are well designed otherwise. The vehicles. I felt like the airboat stage went on too long, and there really isn't much to do while you are driving other than keep your foot on the gas. You can't use any of your weapons while you are driving it, so the only way you can fight back is by running enemies over. Not very satisfying. The dune buggy stage later on, while shorter, is even worse. The controls are awful. There were countless times when I got stuck and seemed unable to move in any direction. It was also way too easy to run off the road. Once again, there isn't really anything to do while driving other than floor it. I guess it is kind of fun to just speed down empty paths and tear around corners, but it gets old pretty quickly. I also found it a bit strange that I can't see Gordon Freeman's hands while driving either of these vehicles. Gordon Freeman is mute. This game is well known for having no cutscenes, but there are many times during the game when there is nothing for you to do but watch. This doesn't bother me too much as the storyline is somewhat interesting, though the opening and ending sequences are kind of stupid. But the fact that I'm able to control Gordon Freeman while the story is unfolding before me makes me feel like I should be able to interact with what's going on either physically or verbally. There are many times in the game when the NPCs will talk directly to Gordon Freeman, and it seems a bit odd, if not rude to me, that he doesn't say or do anything in response. You can even walk off while someone is in the middle of talking to you. It's a bit silly, really. I'm not saying that they should have given Gordon Freeman a voice, but they could have created the illusion that he's spoken without actually hearing him. Like an NPC might say, "Well, it looks like we're going to need some help here." "What's that? You'll help us? That's great, thanks Dr. Freeman." See, you don't actually have to hear Freeman speak to understand that that's what's happened. Onslaught of enemies. I feel that there are a lot of parts to this game where the real key to getting by is trial and error. I'll come to an area for the first time, then suddenly a bunch of enemies will start firing at me, and I have to look around frantically to find where they are. Sometimes they sneak up behind me, or they meet me in a dark area where I'm not expecting there to be enemies. Or there are just so many of them that it's just impossible to survive the first time. You have to know that they are coming and where they're going to be. I guess this is why the game has a quick save feature. By the way, I like how it saves while you are still playing. I wish more games did that. But it still feels a bit cheap. It seems like the challenge is just remembering when and where certain enemies are going to show up. That's not right. I also feel like later in the game, the step up in challenge is only in the number of enemies there are, not how hard they are to kill. I felt at times like they were just acting as target practice for me, which I guess in the early parts of the game makes sense, but is a bit silly later on. Your allies. The level where you lead the antlions towards Nova Prospekt was awesome, probably the best part of the game. Seems a bit cowardly to be sending them off to their deaths while you hung back and did very little, but it was still very satisfying to see them swarming enemies for you. However, a similar stage later on where you have a bunch of human allies wasn't nearly as satisfying. There didn't seem to be any way to send them in ahead of you, they don't kill that many enemies, and most of the time they just got in your way. There was even one point when I had to kill one of them because he was physically stopping me from being able to move. The gravity gun. I had heard a lot about the gravity gun, about how everything was a projectile. While that's true, you also have to find ammo for it. and while you are aiming, your view is restricted. I felt most of the time it was just easier to use something with bullets. I rarely used it to fight enemies, other than head crabs since you don't need ammo for them. Also, the tutorial segment on how it works went on way too long, and actually felt a bit juvenile. Why did it even need a tutorial? Using it seemed fairly self-explanatory. It was clever how they used it for some puzzle-solving parts of the game, and the upgrade it gets near the end of the game was awesome. So it isn't worthless, just not that special a weapon for me. Also, I get the impression a lot of people felt the upgrade wasn't used for long enough in this game, because the sequel gets a lot more use out of it. And yes, it was awesome there too. The Striders. There isn't really any kind of final boss. In fact, the last thing you do to beat the game seemed very straightforward. So I'm guessing the fight with the Striders just before the final chapter is supposed to seem like a final boss, which seems a bit uncreative to me. It's not like it's one really powerful Strider, it's just a lot of normal ones. The only real challenge in taking them down is the fact you have to keep reloading, since the grenade launcher only holds 3 shots at a time. Also, if they see you, there isn't really anything you can do to avoid its attacks and be able to attack it yourself. So the fight was really more annoying than it was satisfying. It's one of those fights where you don't really feel any kind of euphoria after you defeat them. You just feel relieved that it's over. Pick up that can. How fucking stupid do you think I am? Why would I want to do that? Just make him leave his post and then run past him. Most of the game's other flaws I can overlook, but that's just unforgivable. Worst game ever, 4 out of 10. Wait a minute. 10 minus 4 is 6. The game has a 2 in its title. 6 divided by 2 is... No, I'm not going to make that joke. Okay, but seriously though, you probably think I hate this game now, and I really don't. These are mostly just nitpicks or things that I still liked but felt could have been better. Half-Life 2 is a really good game, and I'm glad I finally took the time to check it out. It's actually for that reason I don't think there should be a Half-Life 3. Because how do you top this game? If they make the game at all similar to Half-Life 2, people will say that it's only breeding off of its success. The only way Half-Life 3 could be seen as being anything like as good as its predecessor is if they take things in a completely different direction. And in that sense, I'm not really sure what else they could do. So I for one hope Half-Life 3 is never confirmed.